Free agency is here, and the Lakers already made some key signings. It already looks like an improvement from last season, but that's a pretty low standard. But still, improvement is improvement, so let's discuss these signings and how these players could potentially contribute to the team. Now, keep in mind, this video will only be about free agents. I know there are probably a few names we're hoping to get or get rid of, but at the time of recording this, those transactions haven't happened yet, and those particular players will be acquired or shipped off via trade. Right now, I'm just discussing free agent signings. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Let's start off with the most expensive free agent the Lakers got, Lonnie Walker IV. The Lakers signed him with the mid-level exception, which is about $6 million for 1 year. Now in a vacuum, this would be a solid signing. He's young, athletic, an okay defender, only 6'4", but has a 6'10" wingspan, so he could still be a solid perimeter defender. He's a career 34% shooter from 3. He actually had his worst season last season, shooting only 31%. So he's not a sniper by any means. But if he can bring that percentage up to his career average, that's respectable enough for the defense to play him honestly and create the spacing on offense that we need. He still has a lot of upside, so he could be a useful player for years to come. So just on talent alone, this is a solid signing. However, based on what the Lakers actually need, this is a little concerning. The mid-level exception was the biggest tool that they had to sign free agents. The rest of the signings are going to be minimum deals because the Lakers are already hard-capped. So they should have used the mid-level exception to address their biggest need, a 3-and-D wing. Preferably one that is 6'8" or taller and can guard the 3 to 5. Now those players probably aren't going to go for the mid-level exception, let alone the vet minimum, with the demand for those players being high and the availability of those players being very low. We've already seen what some of these players are getting paid, and the Lakers can't afford that. But still, I think they could have been wiser in how they spent that money. Maybe spend it on a guy like TJ Warren or Markieff Morris, guys coming off of injury who may be willing to take a pay cut to prove themselves. So when you consider all those factors, the signing is a little underwhelming, but it's not the worst thing they could have done with the mid-level exception. Now let's move on to their veteran minimum signings. Juan Toscano Anderson, JTA. I think this is a very underrated pickup. He can be a solid 3-and-D wing for the Lakers. He has good length and good size. He's a career 36% three-point shooter. And he's coming off a championship season with the Warriors. Now, he didn't play much at all in the finals or even in the playoffs, but he did have some significant minutes during the regular season and was even tasked with guarding the opposing team's best players like Damian Lillard. I just love the passion and energy he plays with. He could be a key player this season for the Lakers. Damian Jones, a familiar face. He signed a 2-year contract with a player option in the last year, but it's still a minimum contract. He played a couple games for the Lakers 2 seasons ago, and he was solid. And he's still solid. He provides a skill set that the Lakers need. He's a good athletic center that can be a lob threat and can protect the rim and get rebounds. Kind of like Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, and even what DeAndre Jordan was supposed to do, except hopefully Damian Jones will be more reliable with him having younger legs, and hopefully he'll be available in more games. Now he's probably not going to play every night, depending on the matchups, but he'll definitely be needed on some nights. This also allows Anthony Davis to play more power forward, which we all know is his preferred position, even though it might not be his best position. But hopefully having him play the position he's most comfortable with means he'll be healthier for most of the season. Lastly, there's Troy Brown Jr. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know much about this guy. Never heard of him until the Lakers signed him. But from what I've heard, he's a good slasher, he's got good size, he's athletic, he's young, only 22, and he's a career 34% shooter. So there's definitely potential for him to be a solid 3-and-D wing for the Lakers, even for years to come. Now let's talk about who they lost in free agency. So far it's only been one player, but it's a big one. Malik Monk. Monk is signing with the Kings to reunite with his Kentucky backcourt mate, De'Aaron Fox. Now it does hurt to lose him. He was one of the only good things to happen last season, but the Lakers could only give him the mid-level exception, and he got paid a lot more to go to Sacramento. He deserves to get paid, especially after taking only the minimum from the Lakers last season and having the success he did. But his skill set is more of a luxury than a necessity. For a good team, you need to have good defense and good spacing, just as a foundation. Then, if you're able to get a microwave scorer like Malik Monk, then that's a bonus. But you're gonna need those other things first, and that's what the Lakers prioritize this free agency. Monk does provide spacing, but not so much defense or size. So it was probably best for both parties that they went their separate ways. Now, the rest of the older guys that were on the team last year have not been signed yet, and I doubt the Lakers are going to bring them back. They're clearly going in a younger direction. Maybe they bring back Melo because he can still contribute as a scorer and a shooter, plus his relationship with LeBron. But other than that, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if none of those guys get signed anywhere. That's how bad it was last season. So overall, I think it's been a solid free agency for the Lakers. None of the signings have been eye-popping or all that sexy. But the Lakers are pretty limited with what they can do and the contracts they can hand out due to their current cap situation. So they're doing their best with what they've got. I think it's clear they're going for more youth. They realized their mistake from last season, but I do think they went a little overboard with it. I would like to see guys with some more experience. Most of the players that they got only have a couple years in the league. But then again, that's probably the only players you get to sign for the minimum. Either really young guys that still have to prove themselves, or really old guys that have to prove that they still have it. If that's the choice, then I'd rather go for the younger option, because that player could potentially grow into a really good player. And it looks like the Lakers are prioritizing athleticism and defense over shooting. Again, they probably can't afford players that can do both, 3-and-D players. So if that's the choice, I too would prioritize defense and simply get shooters that are good enough to keep the defense honest. So not a bad strategy considering their limitations. I think the Lakers have done pretty good so far. There are still a few roster spots to be filled, and more players can be signed. But where they can really make a splash and potentially make themselves a contender is through trades. I, along with you all, will be patiently or impatiently waiting for that news to drop. But as of right now, a pretty good start to free agency and the offseason.